Good evening, everybody. My name is Ashley Anderson, and I would be the facilitator of a potential group therapy session that will focus on trauma, grief, and loss group therapy. So, a little bit of background about why I chose to pursue this topic is because I'm actually interested in educating myself on the dynamics of trauma, how people suffer, how people understand one another, and how they cope with the situation. I'm actually an individual that actually suffer from grief. Of course, we all have, and lost trauma. And I'm actually thinking about partaking in that field and in that area of study. So that is why I chose to focus on this particular topic. It's very interesting to know what goes on in people's minds, how they deal with this difficult situation, how they deal with the trauma, and how they interact with other members that are also experiencing similar losses and areas of the stages that they will be going through. Okay, so these are some of the terms that I researched so that we can all just have a understanding of each one. Bereavement, mourning are different. So I'm going to basically read the definitions of each one. So trauma is an unusual, troubling event which generates substantial anxiety, acute stress response, sense of horror, and overwhelming helplessness. So when you think about trauma, when people are dealing with something and they're reliving it, they may have things that when they say sense of horror, that may include nightmares, anxiety. You may have the fear of this happening again. So when you think of grief and loss, when you lose someone, rather it's through death, rather it's through incarceration, rather it's through equity, a home, anything such of that nature, you have the fear of it happening again. You seem to relive that, and overwhelming helplessness. So you basically your brain may trigger some things inside that may feels like you were unable to stop the situation, and that's where the stress comes in, and that's when the trauma is triggered because you feel helpless. Okay, so mourning. The outer expression of the internal experience of grief. So when you hear the term mourning, so basically there's an amount of time set out for mourning. People mourn differently. Some people stages of mourning may last up to a year. It may last up to 6 months. So it's an eternal experience of grief. Bereavement, the state of having suffered a loss. So bereavement is just what it says. It's pretty much self-explanatory. The state of having suffered a loss, basically. Okay, so my target population that I chose to focus on were adults. I chose to focus on the adult population of both sexes, male and female. I chose to make it co-ed because I kind of wanted to understand how, if adults have children, how that impacted their parental skills, how they were able to live and cope with having children in the house. Also, I wanted to get a better understanding because I know with children, it takes a lot more time to get them to speak about what they're suffering with. And then in this specific group is brief therapy. So when you're working with adolescents, you find yourself having to expand the amount of sessions because you want to get them a little bit more involved and give them activities. Preferably, I would prefer when working with children to use a psychodynamic technique theory, because at least with that theory with children, you're able to get them to draw pictures about what they're dealing with. You can act it out. You can do the antagonist, protagonist things versus with adults, you can kind of get them to talk about it. They're a little bit more patient. And by this being a brief therapy session, it's a little easier with focusing on adults. So I wanted to get that understanding and get a little bit more information with that. Okay, so the treatment issue would be complicated grief, which is grief that is stuck in a state of chronic mourning, meaning if they can't get out of the mourning, they're unable to function. The grief it's affecting them and impacting them so much that they may have to take medication for it, or they may have suicidal thoughts because they're feeling so hopeless about it. So I chose to focus on complicated grief because of that. So with that, I would do an assessment of complicated grief. And it's considered appropriate for adults if the loss occurred at least 12 months earlier. By assessing for complicated grief, usually psychiatric disorders that are currently listed in the DSM-5, individuals with CG may be overlooked or forced into an inappropriate diagnostic category. So instead of just putting a person on medication because they may be depressed, well, maybe they feel anguish and maybe they just need to talk about it. So I just chose to focus on the chronic mourning because of that issue. So the dynamic of the group, I chose to do 8 sessions, which is brief therapy. I chose to use only 8 participants because I wanted the group to be a little bit more intimate. I didn't want any group members to feel left out. And I kind of wanted to get input from everybody in the group. As a group therapy facilitator, I'm an advocate for everybody participating because oftentimes, people may leave those groups feeling like they didn't get anything out of it simply because they didn't participate or they felt like they weren't a good fit for the group. So I chose to use 8 participants because it's a little bit more intimate. And also I thought 8 participants was an appropriate number because not only, let me go back to the last slide, for complicated grief, I failed to mention the various losses. So with trauma, with grief and loss, I would want to focus on all types of losses. So that would include the death of a loved one, the death of a pet, loss of an individual through incarceration, loss of equity state, which can include a home, a home, a house, a business that you may have owned. And the reason why I chose to focus on these different dynamic of things is because I wanted the group members to be able to interact with one another and understand how each one of these individuals overcame that grief. There's a terrible thing or a terrible stigma about people who has lost an individual or a loved one through incarceration, and they're told that they just have to get over it, or that's not really something significant that you'll grieve over. Well, it is. A person that loses someone is almost the equivalent as losing somebody to death, although when a person dies, that you'll never see that person again. Well, if a person loses a loved one to incarceration that's been in prison for 30 years, it's almost the same thing, especially if they're being shipped off to a different place. So all of these people are suffering in many different ways. Well, that opportunity gives people to interact with one another and give feedback as to how they got over that process. So I wanted to talk about the various losses just as well as losing a pet. A pet is a part of a family. If a person adopts a pet and they've had it for over 10 years, that person it's like a family member to that person. So that person suffers significantly. That's a method of complicated grief. So I wanted to focus on these various losses to get the group to interact and kind of give feedback as to how they can get through that together. How can they cope with that together? So back to that. So the 8 sessions would include the 8 participants which would be the intimacy of the group so that they can interact. I choose not to use so many participants, and I chose an even number just in case I wanted the group members to partner up. For example, at the beginning of the group, how I would start the group is by having each member partner up with an individual and explain a little bit why they're in the group, what made them want to join the group, and to talk a little bit about their situation and what are some of their goals and what they want to get out of the group. If I have an odd number of members, then of course one member will be left out. So I chose 8 participants purposely because I thought it was an adequate number. I thought it was appropriate. And I thought that it will bring out the intimacy in the group members. And the theory that I chose to focus on is REBT, which is also Rational Emotional Behavior Therapy, because I like the technique where you can get the group members, do homework and to think about some of the things that they are doing and considering what's happening to them. And I'm going to talk about that more in detail on the next slides. Okay, so REBT therapy would include the ABC model, which is what I will focus on and which will be my intervention method. I'm going to explain what the ABC framework is. The ABC framework will be included in session 3 of the group. I will explain the session. So session 1 would include the warm welcome to the group members from facilitator me, of course. The group facilitator will, of course, will go over the informed consent that will be given to the members to look over and sign. In the informed consent, basic information about the group is discussed. The informed consent demonstrates honesty and respect for the group members, their culture, and fosters the trust necessary for members to open and be honest. So basically, this is just to open up session. Want the group members to feel comfortable with the group members. I want them to get the general rules and regulations just to see if it's a good fit for them. I want to talk to them about confidentiality, of course, that what we discuss in the group shall remain in the group, and they don't have to worry about anything that they feel is significant to them or that could be detrimental to their therapeutic environment to be exposed to other people outside of the group. So that's what session 1 would consist of. Okay, in session 2, members will be asked to explain how they're feeling, of course, about being a part of the group. The floor will be open for thoughts and concerns. Each member will be given the opportunity to explain why they decided to participate in grief counseling. The purpose of this question is to develop some cohesiveness and the openness of the group. And in session 2, of course, I would, formulate a little activity. Of course, what got me here, which is a question basket, where the members will, of course, interact with one another and explain why they're there. What is it that they're suffering from? Who is the person in their life or the thing in their life that they're grieving over, and why? What are some things that what are they doing right now that they're coping with the situation? And is it healthy for them? So this is some of the things that we'll discuss in session 2. And then session 3, just to get to the point about the ABC model. So session 3 is when, excuse me, I will introduce REBT ABC model to the group members and educate them as to what it is, the definition of it, and how it will be used. So the ABC model, A would be the event. So that will basically explain the event that the incident occurred. So, excuse me, let me fix my camera. So basically, A will be the event, what happened, what initiated the trauma. B is the belief, which is what we'll try to change. Which is the irrational belief, is as to what is it that you believe, why, what is it, what is the belief? So basically it triggers C. So C is the emotional consequences. For example, the emotional consequence would be depression. And the belief would be, I'll give an example. My fiance was incarcerated. I'm depressed. I don't think I can live without him. So the event is that my fiance was incarcerated. The emotional consequence is that I'm depressed. And then the belief would be, I can't live without him. So I can't live without him is what we'll try to change. That is an irrational belief. So we want to make it a rational belief. So how can we do that? So making that an irrational belief is, if you say so can you really not live without him? What is it that you can do to keep going? What motivates you? So the rational belief would be, my fiance is incarcerated, but I can make it. I believe everything is going to be okay. I'm going to focus on me. I'm going to think positive about it. That would be a rational belief. So we will do the application of the ABC theory, to change that irrational belief. And this is the flyer that I created. It's a little small. So this is this grief group. I chose the picture because it shows diversity in the group. It's intimate. It has 8 people. I'm sorry. Significantly, surprisingly, I didn't even notice that it had the same amount of people that I chose. And then I just put suffering from loss, ? You are not alone. Providing support, community, and coping resources for those grieving a death, incarcerated loved one, a pet, loss of equity, etc. To sign up, please contact me, of course, with my phone number and email address. National Lewis Counseling Center. The services will be free because this is just what I want. It's just a study. Located, my address will be there, the time of the sessions, and the date and how many sessions would occur. So that would include my presentation. I know it was very brief. So any questions, you can just leave a comment, let me know, and I do not mind answering. Thank you so much for listening.